I tossed and turned in bed, unable to fall asleep. My mind was filled with the scene from a few days earlier, the sharp, piercing gaze, the heavy labored breaths that seemed as though they might swallow me whole. That scorching heat still lingers on my skin even now. I am 55 years old, and in all my life, have you never experienced anything quite like this? Calling it emotion feels too mild, calling it instinct might be more accurate after all. That night, the cicadas chirping outside the window sounded unusually loud and incessant. I tossed and turned in bed, my body still faintly carrying the lingering sensation of something scorching deep within me. Unfading in my mind were the suffocating scenes from just a few days ago. The gaze, sharp as a sword, was so searingly intense that it seemed poised to set my entire being ablaze and melt it away. Almost brutal warmth still clung to my skin like vines, refusing to let go. I am 55 years old, and after living most of my life, had I never experienced this sensation like being struck by an electric current. To call it emotion might be too mild, to call it instinct seems far too primitive. And the man who has thrown me completely off balance. Logically speaking, guilt should have overwhelmed me like a tidal wave, but that late night, the strongest thought in my heart was actually to see him again, to be once more enveloped by his aggressively intoxicants. Perhaps from that very moment on, I had already crossed the point of no return. Hello everyone, my name is Chen Yufan. I am 55 years old and live in an older residential building in the Nantan district of Tichi, a neighborhood that has been around for quite some time. My husband, Zhang Haiming, is 57 years old. He drives a big rig truck on long-haul routes. He leaves home at 7 p.m. and often doesn't return until dawn. His home, he has always us asleep. I can't even remember when we last truly showed each other warmth and tenderness. Was it once every 2 months? Or maybe once every 3? But that's just perfunctory, like going through the motions of a routine chore, completely devoid of any real warmth or feeling. My daughter married and moved to Canada 4 years ago, and I'm going to say, and day by day our home has become quieter and quieter, and my heart has grown emptier along with it. Life has been passing by in a monotonous, water-like manner until last month, when Lennox Ayui, my best friend of 30 years, came to visit me. Chewy is the same age as me and lives on the 5th floor of this building. Ever since we got married, we've been inseparable, going together to the vegetable market to haggle over prices, hiking up mountains together, finding joy in everything we do. But that day, she did completely changed. Her cheeks were sunken, her cheekbones stood out sharply, and her eyes were filled with exhaustion. Slightly Shui I used to know was gone. As she sat down, her eyes welled up with tears and her voice trembled as she said, "Shu Fen, I am really so exhausted, I feel like I am about to die." Her fingers kept twisting the hem of her clothes and she looked utterly helpless. I was startled and asked her what was wrong. Really then did she gradually reveal her feelings, saying it had something as affairs. Her husband, Zhao Jiangwo, is 58 years old. He used to be a criminal investigator, having spent over 20 years in that tough guy role. He retired 2 years ago and now works as a security guard in the community, spending most of his time at home. Shui blushed and lowered her voice, saying, "Jiangwo has incredible stamina, it just can't seem to slow down at night. At first he did stay up for at least 2 hours straight, but yesterday he kept going until 4 in the morning. I was utterly stunned. Hey, at our age 2 hours? At 4 in the morning. I asked her if she'd been to see a doctor, and she shook her head, saying, "That's so embarrassing, I am 55 years old. How could I possibly bring myself to talk to a doctor about something like that?" Saying that things had gotten even worse after the founding leader retired every single day, he demanded something, and if she didn't give it to him, he'd throw a tantrum. She said, "I really don't know what to do anymore. My body goes stiff and when I hear footsteps approaching the bedroom, I just want to run away." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she choked back a sob and said, "It'd be better if he just went out and found another woman, went and bent his energy somewhere else. Otherwise I'll really lose it." Hearing her despair, I felt deeply pained, but at the same time, an inexplicable, shameful curiosity began to creep into my heart. A man who lasts 2 hours, I own ticking once every 3 months, and he has done in just 5 minutes. The reason GMO clings to you so much is because he cares about you. My own family member can't even be bothered to give me a second glance. There is nothing to envy about, as I am really close to reaching my limit. She said her mom back in Teosia wasn't feeling well and she'd be heading home to take care of her for about a week. She asked me to help out by preparing some dishes, pickling some kimchi and braising some meat to bring over to Jiangwo, since she was worried he wouldn't eat properly if he were on his own. I hesitated for a moment, but still agreed. After all, we've been sisters for 30 years. I packed the homemade kimchi and braised pork carefully and neatly, and, carrying the heavy bag, I made my way to her apartment on the 5th floor. Strangely, my heart suddenly started racing. I'd been coming in and out of this door for 30 years. Yet today I felt as nervous as if it were the very first time I'd ever stepped through it. I pressed the password and joined in, then shouted loudly, "Jiangwo, XIUE is calling me to deliver the vegetables." The living room was eerily quiet. Footsteps came from the direction of the bedroom. Jiangwo walked out wearing a loose-fitting t-shirt. The moment our eyes met, all the words Yui had spoken suddenly flooded back into my mind. My face instantly flushed hot, and I quickly lowered my head. He took the bag and said with a smile, "You don't have to go to all this trouble." But his smile carried a hint of melancholy. I casually said, "Shui is going to Kyoxian. Should you feel a bit more relaxed now, bet you are on your own." He fell silent for a moment, then said softly, "It is true that things feel easier now, but lately, even at home, I've been feeling strangely empty. People see me as strong and imposing, but deep down, I've always felt hollow. Now that XIUE is around, she avoids me altogether when the two of us are at home together. We end up feeling even lonelier." His gaze was firm yet concealed a vulnerability lion whose heart was quietly roaring with loneliness. I called him help but asked, "Is it just because you were lonely?" My voice trembled slightly in the quiet living room. He looked at me and spoke slowly, saying that he knew he was asking too much and causing XIUE a great deal of pain. He also knew that the older he got, the more he seemed to crave things that he just couldn't bring himself to control it. He said before, when I was a criminal investigator, I'd be so exhausted that I'd fall asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow. But now that I am retired, it feels like I've got endless energy. His gaze suddenly turned intense as he stared at me and whispered, "It is strange though you were Juliet's friend. Why do you make such an impression on me?" Then, he took my hand. His palm was burning hot, yet somehow I didn't pull away. His voice trembled as he asked, "Could you just hold me once?" In my 55 years of life, I've never seen a man look at me with such longing. My own husband always just turns around and falls asleep from sheer exhaustion, but this man before me seems to see me, as if I were the whole world. I nodded gently. Bianconis embraced a solid chest, rugged from more than a decade of relentless battles. He asked, "Is it really okay?" I said in a low voice, "I am not like her, I want to give it a try." He carried myself mentally, yet I was still taken aback by the strength of his touch. So I hadn't been exaggerating, his movements were truly persistent and intense. Yet surprisingly, he was gentle, like a man with plenty of experience, slowly guiding me to relax and gradually deepening the connection bit by bit. When it all really began, I called in the help but let out a sound of sensation I'd never experienced before. It hurt, yet it felt utterly full. I was afraid, yet somehow I just kept going. I told him to slow down, but he seemed like a completely different person, brimming with endless energy. For nearly 2 hours, several times I'd almost lost my breath. I shouted stop, but he insisted, "Just one more little bit." His energy left me with no choice but to surrender completely to him. Strangely enough, the further I went, the more my body adapted and the pain gradually transformed into an indescribable kind of pleasure. I even began to actively seek it out. That was the first time I truly understood what it meant to experience a genuine thrill. I could barely stand up. My lower body was terribly swollen, and my whole body ached all over, but deep down, I felt a long-lost sensation, the feeling of being truly wanted and fully possessed. Lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling, I was still reliving every single moment, my heart still racing with excitement. In the afternoon, he called to ask if I was doing okay. It hurts a lot, but I still want to do it again. Even I was startled by what I'd said. How could I possibly utter something like that? Deep down, that evening after Shiming went out, I headed upstairs to the 5th floor again. Read and bought a shorts curtain, didn't even bother putting on underwear. At 55, doing something like this felt as if I'd had too much to drink. As the sensation gradually faded, I found myself feeling as though I'd somehow returned to being 25 years old. As soon as the door opened, Benny immediately picked me up. On the living room sofa, we started again more passionately than yesterday. "You remember what Shisha say? You were amazing." From the sofa to the window, then to the bathroom, and back to the bed, our whole home has become our battlefield. He kept praising me, saying, "I am way better than Shui, she can fully accept me." That is true for Shui, but with me, he really does enjoy it. That week, XAUA was in Taiyoshu, and we saw each other almost every day. Each time we'd spend more than 2 hours together, sometimes even twice a day. While I could hardly walk yet, I just couldn't bring myself to stop. Would he become like a dick? Our body's the most powerful drug of all. The day before XIUA came back, we made love 3 times 3 whole hours of it. I lost count of how many times we reached climax. All I knew was that I felt as if I were dying and yet I'd gladly do it again. In the end, we said goodbye through tears and sobs. You're powerful, than the guilt of betraying a friend was the emptiness of knowing we'd never feel that way again. Her complexion had improved, and she said that Jiangwu had changed. He was now much gentler, and the sessions lasted only half an hour. Finally, she could get a good night of sleep. My heart gained a sudden jolt, but on the surface I smiled and said, "That's wonderful." In fact, during that entire week 2 weeks later, she said again that Mom was not doing well and needed to return to KOC, and this time for another 2 weeks. I proactively messaged Jiangwu. XIUA has left again. I am heading over there tonight. I am waiting for you. At that moment, my face turned red and my ears burned, and my whole body felt hot. This time, I was even bolder, seeing him both during the day and at night. Even Ming would come straight to my bedroom after finishing his business. Each time, I was on edge with anxiety, yet that very tension only made it all the more thrilling. One evening, he asked me how often I was visiting. I said, almost never, maybe once every 3 months, and even then it asked me who has to ask for it. It is over in 5 minutes, becoming even more excited, and his movements grew fiercer. He said, "You really take great care of your body." He left no inch untouched. I was completely swept away. I used to fear pain, but now I can't live without it. For 2 weeks we were at it 3 times a day. Several times I passed out only to wake up and keep going. One day, he suddenly said, "Let us get divorced and marry me." I was shocked and said, "No way, XIUE is my sister of 30 years. She said she knew, but all she could think about every day was me. She called and she go on without me. "Call until we just meet secretly like this," she replied. "Let us give it a try." We resumed our neighborly relationship. Whenever she came back to KOC, we'd meet once or twice a month. The children's playground and the underground parking lot, we'd make eye contact to arrange our next meeting. XIUA came to my home again, looking strangely agitated. She said that now Jiangwu rarely touches her, just once a week for half an hour, and while it felt relaxing at first, now it feels odd. Then she is starting to suspect he is seeing someone else on the side. Where would I get the energy for an affair? But she said he has been going out a lot lately, claiming it is for friend gatherings and coming home late, sometimes as late as 11 o'clock. I remained calm, but inside, cold sweat was pouring down my back. Our relationship was deepening more and more, beyond just physical intimacy. I'd truly fallen in love with him, in love with him, and he felt the same way. He whispered sweet words of love into my ear. The community is tiny, and there are eyes everywhere. And even the looks my neighbors give me in the elevator all send shivers down my spine. One morning, as I was heading to the 5th floor, Mrs. Wang, who lived on the same floor, asked with a smile, "Had you been visiting Zhuyi's place a lot lately?" When I offered to help deliver the vegetables, he gave me a suggestive look as if he knew something. I told Jiangwu, and he said to be careful. We could meet too, and all my worries instantly vanished. Another month passed, and Zhuyi didn't ring the doorbell. She just walked in using my home as password. Her face was ashen, and she got straight to the point. "Are you and Jiangwu having something going on?" I forced a smile and said, "No, we're just giving away some vegetables." There's a woman has perfume scent in the Jiangwu car just like mine, and the same number shows up on the phone bill. He wanted to check it out, but I vehemently denied it. She looked at me for a long time, then turned and walked away. From that day on, our friendship began to crack. We started making fewer phone calls, and even when we did meet up, the encounters felt awkward. The more dangerous it gets, the harder it is for us to stop. One late night, Seki was working the night shift, and Jiangwu and I were in my bedroom. Just as we were going wild, the front door suddenly burst open. Seki's voice came through, "Where as you fat?" We hurriedly got dressed. The bedroom door was thrown open, and Jiangwu was already wearing pants while I was wrapped in the quilt. Seki's face contorted, and he roared, "What it? I can't see." He said he was going to call XIUA, and Jiangwu begged him not to, but he'd already dialed the number. Half an hour later, XIUA burst in. She cried out, "We've been friends for 30 years, how could you do this to me?" She grabbed my hair and slammed me onto the ground, leaving a burning pain on my cheek. 30 years of friendship was shattered in an instant. "Yet you treat me like this. All those daily deliveries of vegetables, turns out you were here to have an affair." Jiangwu lowered his head and remained silent, while Zeki roared that he wanted a divorce. That night was like hell, crying, shouting, blaming, and apologizing all mixed together. When dawn broke, Xiue and Tianwo returned to the 5th floor, leaving me alone at home. Dickon didn't even glance at me. He sat in the living room, drinking and muttering to himself. After 30 years of marriage, how could you sleep with your friend as husband? I collapsed on the bedroom floor and cried. Everything was gone. Xiue moved back to her parents' home in Kaohsiung. A week later, the divorce complaint arrived on the 5th floor. Dickon is also cold toward me under the same roof. We are both strangers. He sits on the sofa and never looks at me. A month later, the house would be sold and split equally, and from then on, we'd be complete strangers. I didn't even have the qualifications to stay. The greatest pain falls on the children. My daughter came back from Canada and asked me through tears, "Mom, how would you do this? Your friend as husband." I felt so ashamed that I couldn't face anyone, and she cut off all contact with me afterward. He only kept in touch with his dad, saying that Mom was already dead and he didn't want to see her anymore. I am not even a mother anymore. After selling the 5th floor apartment, Jianwo left Zhejiang, his whereabouts unknown. She looked utterly exhausted and said, "Xu Fan, we're free now, we don't have to hide anymore." I shook my head and said, "Baby lost too much." He asked, "Aren't we already each other as?" I gave a wry smile and said, "Is this really love or is it just desire?" He left alone, saying he was heading to Taipei, but didn't leave an address. That's how we parted ways, and our 30-year-old home became someone else's. All I wanted was half the money, so I rented a small apartment in Bantiaowang. I ended up renting one myself too. A month later, he called to say he was working as a security guard in Taipei and asked me if I could come to Beijing this weekend. I was so lonely I was going crazy, so I said yes. He is here, and they were embracing again. But it doesn't feel the same anymore, no longer the thrill of a secret affair, just emptiness left behind. After it was over, he asked us again to get married officially for real, saying we'd talk too much. He fell silent. In the end, we understood each other without saying a word and cut off all contact. Time kept moving forward. A year later, I was living alone in a small studio apartment. Job hunting was tough. No one wanted a 56-year-old divorced woman, but I had no choice but to temporary job at a retail store, spending behind the counter sorting shopping carts and barely making ends meet. One day, I ran into Xiue at the supermarket. She was back in Beijing to sort to her ex-husband's belongings. Yet neither of us said a single word. She turned around and walked away, her face still bearing deep wounds. 30 years came to an end. I started going to church and kneeling down, begging for forgiveness. But what I couldn't forgive most of all was myself. I daydream of Xiue, smiling and calling my name just as she used to. Yet when I woke up, all that remained was an empty, echoing room. I heard that Jianmo had started over in Taipei with a woman 10 years his junior. I felt only emptiness, my jealousy. But rather, how could he move on so quickly while I am still stuck here, wallowing in regret? Now I am 57 years old. My daughter doesn't answer my calls and my son acts as if I don't exist. When I am working at the supermarket and see my mom holding her daughter's hand as I go grocery shopping, my heart feels like it has been torn apart. I used to have days just like that myself. Marriage and the bond between parent and child all were traded away for a few moments of pleasure. People say that as we get older, our desires naturally fade, but I've found that when loneliness and emptiness set in, desire becomes even more terrifying. Once you give into it, you end up ruining your entire life, destroy everything. Right now, there is only one monthly calendar hanging on the wall of my room. Each day I cross off one day. All I can hope for is that one day my child will forgive me, but reality is cruel. My daughter won't answer my calls. My son has completely cut me out of his life. And as for Shui, forget it, she is back to acting just like she used to. Is that really love? Why don't we let desire burn everything to the ground? I hope my story can serve as a wake-up call for others. What do you cherish most right now, your family, your friends, or fleeting moments of pleasure? Right now, outside the window, there is a happy family, children walking hand in hand. Yet one I'll never be able to return to. Time can't be turned back. All I can do is spend the rest of my life consumed by regret. A mere 5-year difference in age at 55 has ruined my entire life. Please, everyone, be sure to restrain your desires, cherish what you already have, embrace your family, and treasure your friends. And as for happiness, my name is Su Jing, and I am a mom who accompanies my child during their studies. My son failed the college entrance exam and was unable to get into university. To attend a school that accepts students simply by paying tuition. As a single mother, my beauty salon has gotten on the right track, no longer requiring me to supervise it around the clock, and now brings in several 100,000 yuan annually. Moreover, having heard that certain aspects of American society are relatively open, I became deeply concerned that my son might go astray. I decided to accompany him overseas and became a companion mom who stays with him throughout his studies, consumption in the U.S. And my income isn't yet sufficient to spend lavishly. So in renting a place, I carefully selected several options and ended up choosing a shared apartment near the school. Living under the same roof with us was a black mother and her son, a black mother named Martha and a black son named David. The black mother and son were very welcoming to our arrival. After chatting, we learned that Martha is also a single mom who came to study here with her son David. My son and I had just arrived in a place where we were completely unfamiliar with the surroundings. To help him make friends quickly, Martha and I discussed it and deliberately chose to live on the first floor, while letting our son and David stay on the second floor. Every night, my son would confide in me, and in a short time, he and David started calling each other brothers. They began going to school together and playing basketball, quickly adjusting to life at the American school. Traveling has become extremely difficult for me, and I gradually found myself stuck in my apartment, rarely going out anymore. I watch Chinese TV dramas and news. I don't feel that much of a difference from life back home, but this situation has brought about a new kind of worry. Life at home feels lonely and monotonous. Unlike when I was in China, where I could go out to socialize, exercise, and release my physical needs have become remarkably intense. It is as if I am holding something inside, constantly feeling like something is missing, something essential to keep me balanced and fulfilled. Wife of the black mother is completely the opposite of me. She is a quintessential African-American working as a bartender. She gets drunk every night and brings different men home late at night, where they become intimately close right there in the living room. At first, when I saw that scene, even though I mentally prepared myself before going abroad, I was still utterly stunned, and at the same time, got angry. How could Martha do something like that? With all that racket, wouldn't she disturb her son's rest? That night, we awake all night amid various noises, fearing that my son might be affected by them. I asked my son if he'd heard any sounds on the second floor last night. My son shook his head and said he'd been fast asleep. And only then did I finally feel relieved. Since then, I've stopped objecting to Martha bringing men home every night. Days passed uneventfully one after another, and before I knew it, I'd already been living in the U.S. A half a year. That night came on with it, a major turning point in my life. That night I was lying in bed reading. Suddenly, the sound of a door opening came from the living room. After a brief moment of silence, a familiar voice rang out, and I found myself unable to keep calm. At that moment, faint footsteps echoed from the second floor. I froze for a moment. Who could it be? Still away? Was it my son or David? Would he notice the disgraceful scene in the living room? The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. Losing all interest, I got up and quietly opened the door, gently pushing it open just a crack. The first thing I saw was Martha, intimately embracing a man on the living room sofa. Just I made my mouth go dry. Suddenly, my whole body froze, unable to believe it. I saw the people at the corner of the staircase, my son and David. The two were hiding around the corner, peeking out cautiously. My son's gaze was blankly fixed on the scene in the living room, while David squinted as he looked toward my room, lost in thought. Swaying back and forth, he seemed to be doing something, though I couldn't quite tell what it was. Thanks to my quiet way of opening the door, David quickly noticed me. When our eyes met, his face turned visibly flustered. He spun around and fled in a panic, disappearing around the corner of the staircase. I was also startled and quickly closed the door, leaning against it with a flushed face. I couldn't possibly fail to understand David's actions. Actually, I'd been mentally prepared for Martha's bold approach. After all, the two boys would surely find out sooner or later. Moreover, David has grown up by Martha's side from childhood to adulthood. If he really didn't know about it, that'd be downright inhuman. Maybe what my son said earlier, that he heard anything, was just a lie to fool me. I get it. During adolescence, how could boys not have a few little secrets they don't want their parents to know? With such a daring and impulsive mother, it is only natural that David couldn't help but act the way he did. How could I possibly still not understand that David was actually doing that kind of thing right in front of my door? It was then that I realized this tall, imposing young man had such audacious thoughts about me. He remembered some details from my daily life, and I'd overlooked when eating with the black mother and son. David would occasionally steal glances at me, and after I finished showering and changed out of my dirty clothes in the bathroom, David would always take over the bathroom next, lingering there for a long time. As I relived these details, David's strong basketball-playing physique gradually began to emerge in my mind. I thought filled with deep shame flashed through my mind. David's robust body was even more impressive than those of Martha's boyfriends. This frail little woman, probably wouldn't be able to handle it at all. Martha loves to sleep soundly until noon. The next morning, during breakfast, two boys and I ran into each other again. After my son sat down beside me, he lowered his head guiltily but quickly looked up again. After all, hadn't really done anything wrong. David, who was sitting across from me, nervously avoided making that contact the whole time, refusing to look at me at all, adopting the bashful demeanor of a shy little boy. Suspiciously, seeing David's expression, I remained completely nonchalant, putting on my usual maternal demeanor as if nothing were the matter. Yet deep down, I felt a slight ripple of emotion. It seems my charm hasn't ended at all. Even approaching 40, I can still make young men utterly smitten and flustered. Since then, I've grown much closer to David. After all, it is hard not to feel drawn to a young man who appreciates you. Why didn't you realize just how challenging it could be for a teenager, caught in the throes of puberty, to receive closeness from a mature woman? For this, I paid a heavy price. That night, I was betrayed by my son and plunged into an abyss from which I could never escape. That late night was very quiet. I caught a bad cold and went to bed early, skipping my usual nightly glass of milk. Around midnight, I was awakened by sounds coming from the living room. I called in to help but feel curious. Could it be that Martha, unable to bear the loneliness any longer? The reason I say this is that Martha suddenly found herself pregnant these past 2 days. But after much effort, she still hasn't been able to determine who the father is. Her boyfriends all claim they use condoms, so they all have to wait until the baby is born before getting tested. Now that she is pregnant, she has become much more settled. She not only switched to a job as a McDonald's server, she mostly just sits quietly at home. I was just wondering, but gradually I began to make out the voices of my son and David. The two young men were chatting in the living room late at night, not sleeping at all. I put on my coat and quietly opened the door, leaving just a crack open as I had done last time, then peeked into the living room. Suddenly my body froze in place. I was struck with astonishment to see on the living room sofa, my son was gently cradling the sleeping Martha, his hand resting lightly on her belly. Bored out of his mind, occasionally glancing impatiently toward my room and then turning his head to quietly ask my son, "We agreed to swap. Why haven't you handed over your mom to me yet?" Exchange. Seeing the scene before me, I covered my mouth in disbelief. My son looked up and glanced toward my room as well, looking somewhat troubled. "David, how about we just stop? Your mom has already." "Now you were saying to stop," David said angrily. "But you were perfectly willing to agree back then." "All right, David, please be gentle with my mom," the son said helplessly. Seeing that he called him to stop David, David's face immediately turned extremely agitated, and he started walking toward my room. Seeing this, I quickly jumped onto the bed and pretended to be asleep, my heart trembling uncontrollably. Oh my God, what on earth is going on? My two sons are actually... It turns out it was my son who got Martha pregnant. And now it is my turn. Should I resist? But David is clearly already worked up and excited. If I refuse to fight back now, I'll probably go completely crazy when he. Or should I just keep pretending to sleep, pretend I don't know anything about what they've been doing and leave it at that? Just when I didn't know what to do, the door slid open quietly, and a tall dark figure loomed over me. I squinted slightly to take a closer look, and there I saw David entering, holding a bottle in his hand, his eyes fixed on me. I instinctively buried my head in the pillow like an ostrich. To be honest, I am not exactly the traditional, old-fashioned type of woman either. Although I am a single mom, during my time in China, my romantic life was never really interrupted. It was precisely because I felt completely out of place and unable to even communicate normally with people when I first moved to the U.S., coupled with the huge cultural and ethnic differences, that I never once considered finding a foreign man to meet my needs. If David were to pursue me normally, I might actually consider it. But a situation like today where my son was treated away like an object without my knowledge, I simply can't accept. Moreover, if we allow our son's behavior to go unchecked, one day they only become more reckless and start hurting even more people just to satisfy their own selfish desires. I dare not even imagine it. As a mother, I should be giving them the right kind of education, not indulging them blindly. So when David sat down by the bedside and reached out to undo my clothes, I suddenly sat up and said seriously. David was so startled that he dropped whatever he was holding onto the floor, his face instantly turning anxious. And Sue, how did you wake up? Didn't you drink that milk? It suddenly dawned on me, no wonder I'd been constantly unable to wake up lately. They'd been tampered with the milk. My expression grew even more serious. David, you are committing a crime here. Go back right now, and I'll pretend none of this ever happened. David's face was full of unwillingness, and his voice was muffled as he said, 别不了70岁. My ruthless refusal made David's face turn extremely grim, and he began staring at me with an expressionless gaze, his breathing gradually growing heavier. At that moment, the atmosphere in the bedroom was incredibly tense. What should I do? Will he force me? I appear serious on the surface, but deep down I am actually quite anxious, fearing that David might rush at me without thinking twice. Finally, David got up and left the bedroom without saying a word. I quickly locked the door behind him, and only when I heard David's footsteps climbing the stairs did I finally let out a sigh of relief. But soon I started worrying again. How could I resolve the situation involving my son and Martha? Oh my God, those two guys are just so reckless and audacious. They even managed to get Martha pregnant. Just thinking about it makes me absolutely furious. That night, I tossed and turned all through the long hours, but couldn't come up with any good solution. It wasn't until 6 a.m., when I could no longer bear it, that I finally fell asleep. Before long, I hadn't even slept for very long when Martha woke me up, dragging me out into the living room. David's face was covered in scratches, looking utterly disheveled and deeply ashamed. As soon as he saw me come out, he immediately lowered his head. My son kept his head bowed throughout the entire encounter. Ida's eyes were red and puffy, as if she'd just been crying. Her face was filled with guilt, and she said that last night, when the two of them had switched moms, but she'd already explained everything to her, she truly felt awful and was relieved that nothing worse had happened. She turned around and snapped to, "Come apologize right now." Davy came over and dropped to his knees with a thud and suit. "I am so sorry I've gone crazy, actually making such a wild suggestion." Seeing this, the son also ran over and knelt down. "Mom, I am sorry, I was just carried away by a moment of foolishness and agreed to it. You can punish me however you like." My eyes welled up with tears. Just don't make the same mistake again. Get up quickly. I hadn't even figured out how to tell Martha yet, but David and the others had already confessed everything to her. Martha, who'd been accidentally made pregnant, had already forgiven them. What else could I possibly say now? I sighed. "Get up now. Don't do it again in the future. Hurry and go to school." The two boys got up in disbelief, seeing that I'd really forgiven them. They felt a huge weight lifted off their shoulders and hurriedly left the house. I watched their backs disappear before turning to Martha and asking, "The baby in your belly, do you really plan to give birth to it?" To be honest, ever since I found out that it was my son who got Martha pregnant, I'd really been hoping she wouldn't give birth to that child, just to accompany my son as he studies here. And when she finishes her degree and gets her diploma, we'd head back home. Who do you want to suddenly end up with another offspring in this chaotic, messed up place called America? It was then that I noticed Martha staring at the back of my head. She squinted her eyes as if lost in thought. After I finished asking, she smiled and said, "Hey, David has grown up now. I am thinking of having another child to keep me company. Besides, he has so your descendant after all." As she spoke, she gave me a teasing smile and said something profound. "Actually, the reason I've been bringing men home lately is that I wanted to have a baby, but they were also cautious, insisting on using protection. Who would have thought it'd end up benefiting your son instead?" I froze for a moment, and strangely distant from Martha and premonition. Could it be that she'd actually known about the boy switch all along? A few days passed, and Martha's belly began to show, while my bad viewing turned out to be true. After becoming pregnant, Martha seemed to have become a completely different person. A week later, she suddenly came to me, saying she didn't have enough money to give birth to the baby and asking me for $50, thinking that the baby growing inside her was, after all, my granddaughter or grandson. I bit my teeth together and took out most of what little savings I had left to give to her. Shortly after, at 3 months into her pregnancy, she suddenly had the idea that I should pay for a condo in the U.S., reasoning that once the baby was born, our apartment would no longer be big enough to accommodate everyone. The first time I heard this request, I immediately refused, suggesting we could look for an apartment in a larger space instead. only to accompany my son as he pursued his studies, planning to stay here for about 3 years at most. How could I possibly buy a house here? Housing prices in the U.S. aren't exactly cheap either. But Martha retorted to me, "Can't you at least think about the child in my belly? She needs to grow up in a long-term stable home." I was speechless, thinking we shouldn't have this kid after all, just get rid of it. It really doesn't cost you anything, but you don't seem to care at all. When Martha saw that I was being firm, she actually went to see my son. I'd always assumed my son would side with me, but I never expected him to agree with Martha's idea. He came up to me looking embarrassed and said, "Mom, after all, the baby in that Martha's belly is my child." I sighed and nodded in agreement. After all, my son is the apple of my eye. At almost 40 years old, I'd already lived most of my life and have little hope for the future. My only real worry is my son. Since he cares so much, I'll just let him do as he pleases. I gritted my teeth once again and withdrew my entire savings, then added most of the cash I had from a local beauty salon and bought a Storyville in Grand Rapids. To make this purchase, I even borrowed some money from relatives. However, this time I started to be cautious about Martha. When it came to buying and registering the property, I used only my own personal name, not even my son's name was involved. As expected, Martha was unhappy about it for a long time. Yet surprisingly, she didn't say a word. Later, as her belly grew bigger and bigger and bigger, Martha became increasingly arrogant toward me and started treating me like a servant. "Your son got me pregnant, and now my belly is so big I can't do a thing. As the child's grandmother, you are the one who should step in." I was furious. Yet what she said did have some validity, and at that moment I called in, tearing myself to say anything like, "We might as well just abort the baby after all." The fetus had grown so big that an abortion would pose a life-threatening risk to both mother and child, so all I could do was enjoy it, gritting my teeth and reluctantly taking on the role of Martha's caregiver. I completely became the family's servant, taking on all the household chores. Meanwhile, I had to just spend her days eating, drinking, and sleeping late into the afternoon. As for David, ever since that incident, he has been avoiding me altogether. Only our son occasionally lends a hand to help me out. The conflict had been building up all along, and suddenly erupted just as Martha was about to give birth. That day, Martha brought a group of men into the house and confronted me with an air of arrogance. "Transfer the house into my..." I'd already sensed Martha was going to push her luck, so I rolled my eyes and said, "If you are not going to have it, then don't see I never wanted it in the first place. I am still looking forward to the child's arrival after all. I am this child's grandmother, and it is a living, breathing being. Even if the child had nothing to do with me, I'd still deeply hope that it could survive. But if I agreed to Martha's request, wouldn't I be falling right into his trap? Right now, I absolutely can't back down." Martha was certain she hadn't expected me to refuse so bluntly. Realizing this immediately, she plopped down onto the ground with a thud, throwing herself around and rolling on the floor, shouting at the top of her lungs, "Oh my God, you Chinese are just so shameless. Not only did your son get me pregnant, but he is also forcing me to give birth. Now all I am asking for is a house for the kid and you won't even give it to me." At her move, several men gave me a sinister smile. "How dare you be so reckless, actually daring to bully us blacks in America." As he spoke, he walked over, grabbed me, and started dragging me toward the sofa. I panicked. "What are you going to do?" "Let me go immediately." At that moment, and the living room alerted the two men upstairs. My son and David ran down from the upper floor and, upon seeing the scene, started shoving each other. Strangely enough, David unexpectedly stood firmly on my side. Wasn't he supposed to be helping Martha? Let her go. After a fierce struggle, I was rescued by the tall and strong David. Startled, I hid behind him, my body trembling slightly as I watched Martha. The others with lingering fears still gripping me. Several men, gradually failing in their attempt, glared at us with grim expressions. Martha stared fiercely at me. "Give me the house or I'll kill the child." I snorted and said, "If you have an abortion now, you will be putting your life at risk." Martha's face hardened. "Then I'll just give birth to him into the river." "You are killing a baby, you were committing a crime." Seeing that I remained completely unthreatened, Martha's already dark face turned even darker, almost as black as ink, pointing at my son and saying to me, "You have no feelings for the child in my womb, could it be? You don't feel anything for your own flesh and blood either. Honey, come over here quick." No sooner had he finished speaking than, under my incredulous gaze, my son hesitated slightly, then lowered his head and walked over to the other side, standing beside Martha without daring to meet my eyes. Mom and Dad's just one apartment, just give it to her, he said softly. Son, I was so furious that my whole body was trembling, and I pointed at my son, unable to utter a word. Beige apartment with every single penny of my savings, every last bit of it. Martha said triumphantly, Sujin, you wouldn't believe it, your son has been sneaking off to meet me all this time. He is completely obedient to me now, he has become my little dog. Doggy, come here and give a bark. Such absurd words. What struck me with shock was that my son didn't even retort. Instead, he smiled and called out something. That one word felt like a sharp blade slicing through my heart, and I was left with a sense of utter darkness pervading the world. My own son, had been molded into this state by that woman. Seeing my utterly distraught expression, Martha burst into laughter. If you don't humiliate your son, just hand over the house quietly. Here you go. I am getting the documents ready right now. Let us head to the property registry center and transfer the house into your name. We cried out, sobbing uncontrollably. Hearing me say that, the men all broke into applause except for David, who hesitated before speaking. By the time I returned to my room, got my documents and handed out, those people had already started a celebratory party at home, marking today as victory. Ironically, even my son had joined in the fun. I gritted my teeth and left the house without looking back. Just then, Payment unexpectedly caught up and called out to me. I paused for a moment and stopped talking. Mrs. Lee, I am sorry, actually. I am not Martha, yes, son, she panted, finally revealing the shocking truth. It turned out that David wasn't Martha's son at all. He'd been an orphan from a working-class neighborhood, and after getting into college, he'd been scrambling to find part-time jobs to help pay his tuition, offering to hire him for $100 a week to play the role of her son. David found the hole, but wouldn't he take on a part-time job that was money but was both easy and well-paid. It wasn't until he played the role for a long time that he realized Martha was a fraud, child-rearing mother, luring unsuspecting men into getting them pregnant, then getting them pregnant and extorting money from them under the pretext of demanding child support. American law offers extremely strict protection for children. Even if a father doesn't want the child, he's still required to pay substantial monthly child support payments until the child reaches adulthood. As a result, her first team always worked like a charm. Up until now, she has given birth to over a dozen children, each with a different father. Thanks to the child support payments from these fathers, she has become a wealthy woman, suffering immensely, but if they refuse to pay child support, they all end up in jail. Sometimes they can't even afford to pay the child support anymore. To avoid being sued by Martha, they were left with no choice but to do as she says and become her henchmen. The men Martha just brought home have all ended up under Martha's control. As an orphan, Miriam wanted seriously, besides to abandon their children. Therefore, he feels these men who fell into Martha's trap on a whim deserve their fate. He needs his part-time job playing the role of a son, which is why he hasn't reported Martha yet. But this time, a Chinese mom unintentionally fell into Martha's trap. Penny simply called in Bear to watch it happen. Seeing that I was about to transfer the house to Martha, he made up his mind and decided to go to the police. I gave David a glare suspiciously. You ain't no better than they are. What I was referring to clearly involved the exchange between him and my son. David's face turned red with embarrassment, and he stammered, Aunt Sue, I am really sorry, but I genuinely like you, which is why I lost my head for a moment. Miriam bought suspiciously. Her expression softened. You go ahead and call the police. But anyway, I wasn't planning on moving out of the house in the first place. I am actually heading back home now. Go back home. David was taken aback and asked in disbelief. Then what about your son? I'll just pretend he is dead, I said irritably. The son who betrays his own family better off without him. The moment I realized my son had become exactly like Martha, I might as well have considered him dead already. That burst of tears just now was merely a ploy to fool Martha and the others into letting their guard down, so I could slip away unnoticed. My grandfather was a Ren who fought against the Japanese invaders, and I was raised from childhood with patriotic education. How could my own child end up looking like that serving foreigners? I can only admit that I am truly not a qualified mother. Might as well just stop being a mother altogether. Might as well just pretend my son is dead. David looked at me again and again, checking to make sure I was any joking. With a look of disappointment on his face, he said, Aunt Sue, I wish you a happy life after you return home. I nodded and said, You too, seriously, find yourself a girlfriend already. I waved my hand and turned away, leaving David staring at me with a dazed expression. That evening, I returned to China and from then on cut off all ties with the United States, completely losing interest in whether David, Martha, or that other person were alive or dead. Ivy started living my own life again. But Ivy made up my mind never to have children again out of fear that I might end up raising them the wrong way. It wasn't until half a year later that I couldn't help but adopt the adorable little girl from the orphanage. Visual, I'll do my best to be a qualified mother. Please could you just put a little more effort into it? Boss, I am not usually this kind of girl, but right here in front of you, I really can't help myself. Today, please be strict with me after all. It has been way too long. Have you been properly taken care of? Nestled deep in the mountains of Taiwan, the delicate fragrance of cypress wood weaves its way between the red tile beams, creating an atmosphere that has both aged and warmly inviting. Chen Yuanshan, 58 this year, runs this quaint little retreat all by himself, and already it has been 6 years since he first took on this venture. He is gently sweeping the fallen leaves in front of the gate. Compared to those dry leaves drifting aimlessly in the wind, his days are actually far from lonely, for there is always someone coming to visit. Today is no exception. A silver SUV slowly pulls up, and a woman with long curly hair sets out from the driver's seat. Hello, boss. I am Lin Wanting, the one who made the reservation. She is 44 years old, and her mature figure is subtly outlined beneath the long coat. Her steps carry a hint of heaviness. The room is ready for you. It is nice and warm, Chen Yuanshan said with a gentle smile. The wrinkles at the corners of his eyes held a warmth as he opened the door for her, carefully examining every corner of Guiyuan, and said softly, "Oh, Guiyuan feels so much warmer, and it does in the photos, almost as if someone has put their heart and soul in to take care of it." Chen Yuanshan didn't say much. He simply led her into the room gently. At 9 p.m, a soft knock came at his door. "May I ask, can I still make a reservation for a massage now?" She appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a bath towel with damp hair. Droplets of water slid down her collarbone. Chen Yuanshan spread the prepared mat on the room as Lauren said softly, "All right, let us start with the back." She slowly lowered herself onto her stomach, and Chen Yuanshan carefully placed his hand on her back. As his palm gently rested beneath her shoulder blades, he said, "You remain under a lot of stress, and haven't you? Your back is really stiff." She didn't say a word, but when Chen Yuanshan's hand reached her waist, she softly exhaled a long breath. "Do you often travel alone?" He hesitated for a moment before answering. "This is the first time since my divorce. I am afraid someone might follow me, so I wouldn't come back." Hearing this, Chen Yuanshan slowed down his movements and said in a low voice, "For someone who has just gone through a divorce, the back is usually where the pain is most intense, because the back is the part of our body that bears the brunt of everything all by itself for the longest stretch of our lives. Please go on." That evening, Chen Yuanshan's hand gently traced along her spine, moving from her waist toward the area between her hips. Suddenly, she slightly arched her back and pulled the bath towel down a bit more. Chen Yuanshan nodded silently, placing his hands gently on the inside of her waist. This was the first question his very first client had ever felt, the first-time confrontation with the wounds deep within her heart. While she kept her eyes closed, a faint smile softly curving the corners of her lips, Chen Yuanshan was still sweeping the courtyard today, and a faint sound came from behind him. "Boss, it is me, Lin Wanting." The next morning, even though it was time to check out, she hadn't packed her bags. Instead, she had come out to the courtyard. "I'd like to stay one more day," she said. Chen Yuanshan nodded silently. "I slept so well last night, my back felt wonderfully warm, and I didn't even have a single dream." In the late afternoon, as golden sunlight spilled onto the red tiled roofs, she appeared once more. "Could you give me a foot massage today?" Chen Yuanshan led her into the room. She sat down carefully in a cross-legged position, extending her smooth feet toward him. As his hands gently cupped the tops of her feet, she took a brief, hollow breath. "It is so cold, you ain't really tense. This area is even more sensitive than your shoulders. All your hidden emotions will flow down to the soles of your feet." She quietly looked up and tilted her head back. Chen Yuanshan gently pressed the sole of her foot with his thumb as a pad, but his fingers sank in. She instantly flinched her leg. "What is that?" "Loneliness," he said with a soft smile. He gently stroked her skin from ankle to ankle with a slow, lingering touch. The warm essential oil seeped into her skin, quickly leaving it moist and glowing. He stopped speaking, and all that remained was the profound stillness of the room. As he quietly prepared to shift his weight onto the other foot, the hem of her knitted sweater effortlessly curled slightly above her knees. The inside of her thigh was briefly exposed. Chen Yuanshan didn't avert his gaze, and neither did she. "I've already got unused to your boss's hands, so now they feel even more dangerous." Chen Yuanshan didn't he say a word. He took her second foot, and a silent wave of warmth once again began to spread from the tips of her toes. It was past 10 p.m., and a light mist hung over the courtyard, while the lights beneath the eaves cast a faint, flickering glow. "Boss, are you still available?" it asked Lin, wanting. As she looked as if she'd just stepped out of the shower, her hair was still damp, and she wore nothing more than a light silk bathrobe that perfectly outlined her figure. Chen Yuanshan paused for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Please lie down. Is today also a back day?" He shook his head gently. "Today I'd like to have it rarer waist. Could you move it down a bit?" She turned around and lay face down, her bathrobe naturally sliding down to her waist, leaving her entire back exposed. The boundary at her waist was clearly visible under the dim yellow light. Chen Yuanshan poured some essential oil onto his hands, then gently wrapped both hands around her waistline. At that moment she took a deep breath and said, "Please give it your all today. I've been holding on to my emotions for far too long." Chen Yuanshan didn't say a word. He simply pressed firmly against her waist. The bones brushed against the muscles, and her fingers gripped the floor tightly as she slowly arched her back. So the feeling of being touched by someone now seemed strange and even a little scary. "But now somehow, I find myself looking forward to it all the time." Chen Yuanshan said nothing, letting the bathrobe slide down along his hand toward the juncture of her hips and thighs. As his fingers slipped smoothly against the dampness of her skin, she let out a soft breath and whispered, "Boss, do you know what expression I am wearing right now?" Chen Yuanshan didn't answer. He simply wrapped his arms around her waist. In that instant she gently turned around, looking up at Chen Yuanshan. Their eyes met, and their breaths intertwined. Just before their lips were about to touch, Chen Yuanshan asked softly, "Even if this is the last time, would it still not matter?" Ren Wanting smiled softly and said, "You'll remember it even more vividly." Her words were both an invitation and a temptation, and more than that, they marked her very first confession to Chen Yuanshan. Chen Yuanshan slowly leaned forward, and between her trembling eyes and lips, their lips finally met. The touch was tentative, but she quickly wrapped her arms around Chen Yuanshan's neck, murmuring, "Please, go on." Chen Yuanshan silently wrapped his arms around her waist, gently sliding the bathrobe off completely. Most importantly, she welcomed his fingertips as if they were a long-awaited rain after a drought. He poured essential oil into his hands once more, this time, but simply to embrace her body, sliding down along her thighs. As Chen Yuanshan's lips slowly traced a path down the back of her neck, and then along her spine, she quietly placed her hand over her mouth and let out a long, deep sigh. "I don't know how long I haven't given myself to someone like this in a long time." Chen Yuanshan gently wrapped his arms around her from behind. She opened herself up completely, and in that moment, there was no longer any hidden reserve or hesitation between them. As their bodies slowly touched, Chen Yuanshan held her tightly amid her brief shiver. The room was utterly silent, yet the hurried sounds of their breathing were enough to let them fully express their feelings for each other. Shortly afterward, Chen Yuanshan wrapped his arms around her and gently stroked her back. As she pressed her ear against Chen Yuanshan's chest and closed her eyes, "Boss, do you think it'd be silly of me to say something like this? I may feels like I'd finally let everything out, both my body and my soul feel the same. This feeling is both warm and a little sweet." I'm gonna say, isn't he just about pure joy? It was comfort for her, and for him, it was a long-lost warmth of love. The day after Lin Wanting left, Chen Yuanshan started with his familiar task of sweeping the floor. Yet his fingertips kept unconsciously recalling the sensation from that night, and the quilt was neatly laid out, but the air still seemed to carry a lingering trace of her fragrance. "I'll come back again. If one day I find myself missing those hands," her last words still echoed in my ears. Just then, the car pulled into the parking lot. A woman who stepped out of the car had an unusual style: short hair, a neat shirt, and tailored trousers. A woman in her early 40s exuding an air of urban sophistication. "I am Huan, and I made an appointment." Chen Yuanshan nodded gently. "Well, are you here by yourself?" "Yeah. I'll do it myself. We don't want to say. Here, it is better to come alone." Shortly after putting down her luggage, she walked into Chen Yuanshan's room and asked softly, "Do you offer massages?" Chen Yuanshan nodded and led her into the room. Huan didn't say much. She simply lay down quietly. "Lately, you've been under a lot of work pressure, haven't you?" She nodded silently. "Your shoulders say it all. Everyone finds it easy to just drop by, but when it comes to me coming alone, others find it much harder." Chen Yuanshan gently relaxed her back with both hands. As his hands came to rest just below her shoulder blades, she softly sighed. "Even if no one is here with me, is that okay?" Chen Yuanshan didn't answer, he simply stroked her back even more gently, because here, even tears could be released through massage. That evening, she quietly left her room and walked into the living room where Chen Yuanshan was. Boss Li had asked a strange question. May I help you? Chen Yuanshan rose silently, and she slowly stepped into his arms. She stood there for a long while in Chen Yuanshan's embrace without saying a word. Chen Yuanshan gently patted her back with utmost care, uttering not a single word. Yet, the touch of those hands conveyed a tender. Huan Yaqian said softly, "This is the first time someone has hugged me, yet I didn't feel scared." Chen Yuanshan gently touched her forehead. If a person as hard as locked is locked tightly, even the best person who comes along won't be able to reach them. She nodded. But your hand, Basa, can pierce the defenses in my heart. That evening, Chen Yuanshan had prepared a warm blanket and the essential oils in the room. Under her delicate shoulder straps and her back and waist curved gracefully. Please be strict with me today. I haven't taken good care of myself for far too long. She bit her lip, and Chen Yuanshan pressed silently and firmly just below her waist and above her pelvis. And right there lies all the love. She gently twisted her body, meeting Chen Yuanshan's gaze head on. Today I am not going to hold back on anything. She slowly turned around, then took Chen Yuanshan's hand and placed it on her own abdomen. It has surging from within. I've always been waiting for your hand, boss. In that instant, Chen Yuanshan gently pulled her into his arms and then kissed her. Please let me release it all, let me have it all with your hands. That night the two embraced each other more deeply and slowly in silence. Her body quietly unfolded wherever Chen Yuanshan's fingertips touched, and the long-suppressed loneliness within her began to slowly seep out. The next morning, Huan Yaqian said with a warm look in her eyes, "It is really strange though. I've only slept one night. My body feels so light and buoyant." Chen Yuanshan smiled. When your mind relaxes, your body will follow suit and relax as well. She gently took Chen Yuanshan's hand once more. I'll never forget these hands. This night, are you Miss Su Pei-jun who made the reservation? Your 43-year-old woman speaking looked slightly weary, with a sense of emptiness as if she lost something. She was carrying a stroller or a suitcase, just a small backpack slung over her shoulder. I handed the child over to her dad, and it has been ages since I had a chance to truly enjoy some time to myself. This is the first time in 3 years that I am sleeping alone. Chen Yuanshan nodded silently. He could see at the fine lines on her shoulders and at the corners of her eyes. Even the careful way she spoke all spoke of someone who had been enduring for a long time. At 10 p.m., he knocked on the door and asked, I asked, is that massage still available? Chen Yuanshan nodded and said softly, let us do an essential oil massage starting from the back to gradually relax your body. Though they weren't exactly revealing to her, this thin outfit took a lot of courage as they lay down on her stomach, her back exposed under the dim light. Chen Yuanshan carefully placed his hand on it. This is probably where they sleep, holding the baby. It is a bit stiff. She lowered her head deeply, clutching the pillow tightly. As she relaxed just a little, tears were on the verge of falling. Chen Yuanshan remained silent, simply pressing gently on her shoulder. She let out a soft, silent moan and exhaled half a breath. Boss, I don't know how long I've been holding it and craving a hug. I just wish someone would call me Pei-jun straight out. I never thought I'd crave something like this so badly. Chen Yuanshan's hand, which had been gently stroking her back, didn't stop as he said, It's Su Pei-jun. Today you can just take a good rest simply because you're a woman. She paused briefly, then gently lifted the quilt and turned onto her side. Chen Yuanshan pulled her closer and held her quietly in his arms. All the night, don't you want to be a mother? I don't want to be an employee. I don't want to be a daughter-in-law. I just want to be a simple woman. Her lips brushed against Chen Yuanshan's shoulder, and Chen Yuanshan silently wrapped his arms around her waist, slowly sliding beneath the quilt. That night, she cried completely, undoubtedly for herself as a woman. Chen Yuanshan, who was sweeping the courtyard, squinted from afar, gazing at the parked vehicle. A familiar color, a familiar license plate, to even the familiar scent. It was also familiar. As the car door opened, a woman dressed in a long coat quietly stepped out. It is someone wanting. May I ask if there are any rooms available today? Chen Yuanshan nodded lightly, as if nothing had happened at all, neither smiling nor showing any surprise. We were always prepared, especially for wanting this room. As soon as she stepped into the room, she didn't even put down her luggage. She seemed to be craving a cup of hot tea. Then placing the tea in front of her, she softly said to Chen Yuanshan, It is kind of strange, I sent it. I've been thinking about your hands, the ones belonging to our boss. Chen Yuanshan asked cautiously, is it physical discomfort or emotional distress? Lin Wanting smiled slowly, her smile tinged with a hint of sadness. Both, I suppose. I felt I couldn't only handle it on my own and came back again. Night had fallen. Lin Wanting didn't ask for it, but Chen Yuanshan was indeed standing quietly at her door. Today I just want to quietly feel your boss's hands, without saying a single word. In the room, Wanting was empty, wearing anything but sense. She was simply lying on a bed, wrapped only in a warm blanket. Chen Yuanshan wrapped his arms around her back, saying nothing at all. There was only the silent exchange of hands and body heat. Under this touch, Lin Wanting slowly closed her eyes and said softly, after that day, I never let anyone touch me again. Chen Yuanshan's hand traced along her back, moving from her waist toward below her hips. But then I missed being touched, so that's why I came back. She lifted the cotton quilt and turned around to look at Chen Yuanshan. Her eyes trembled, yet she didn't look away. I am lonelier today than I was back then. Chen Yuanshan silently pressed his body against hers. The moment close touched till Lin Wanting closed her eyes, her hands wrapping around his neck. As the night began anew, it was no longer just a simple encounter. Once again, she left just as she had that night without saying a word. Chen Yuanshan sat alone in the empty room, staring out the window. Why did this time feel so different? Countless women had sought comfort in his arms only to leave afterward. But Lin Wanting was different. Boss, may I ask, can I still make a massage appointment today? An unfamiliar voice. Why does this call, which should have been joyful, feel so heavy right now? Could you tell me what time you were planning to come? Chen Yuanshan replied as usual, but deep down he called in a feeling of unease and melancholy. Nightfall was upon us. The new guest was a widow in her 40s. My children are all grown up now, and I'd like to live for myself for once, she said with a smile. Yet her eyes were reddened with tears. As usual, Chen Yuanshan gently stroked his back to relax his lower back, and with the tips of his fingers touched the depths of his heart, where a sense of loss had been lingering. Holding him close, he whispered softly, I never expected that at this age I'd still be able to feel such a warm touch. Chen Yuanshan pressed a silent kiss onto his lips and then slipped beneath the covers. Although his body responded, his mind was completely blank. Why are you so quiet? He forced a smile and said, I am concentrating. But he knew it was the truth. At that moment, the face of Lin Wanting flashed through his mind. The roasted green fish he'd placed for her at the dinner table, the courtyard where she used to hang out the laundry. Is it okay if I stay here? Chen Yuanshan didn't leave the room. The guest's knocking on the door sounded several times. As the night grew late, the guest fell into a deep sleep. Chen Yuanshan went out into the courtyard alone and lit a cigarette. He'd quit smoking for a long time, but right now, he felt that only the haze of smoke could slightly blur his face. Wanting, you were really crossing the line with this. The following days were quiet. Chen Yuanshan received guests at about 5 as usual. There was only one person lingering persistently in his mind, Lin Wanting. One day, the village chief came to the guest house and remarked, a woman has moved into the neighborhood. I heard she lives alone and occasionally comes over to the guest house for a stroll. Chen Yuanshan's heart sank suddenly. Could it be? A few days later, a man was sitting on the bench in front of the guest house, gazing up at the night sky, framed by his long hair and tucked into his coat, belonged to Lin Wanting. I rented a suite nearby, and I feel much lighter than I'd imagined it. To being here is one of the reasons why. Hearing his words Chen Yuanshan couldn't say a thing. He could only feel his heart unsettled and wavering. After that day, I've been with other women, Chen Yuanshan confessed frankly. Lin Wanting listened and nodded quietly. I knew it would turn out this way, but it is strange, though I am a bit sad. I can actually understand why. Why can you understand it? Because after that day, I didn't want to see anyone ever again. Han passed quietly, and she came to Chen Yuanshan's room once again. This time, it was empty for a massage. She just wanted him to be by her side. All I ask is that you just hold me. She spread out the cotton quilt, climbed in, and looked at Chen Yuanshan. They were no longer man and woman, just human beings. That night, they didn't make any physical contact, nor did they exchange caresses. They simply embraced each other and fell asleep together. Holding on for a long time, the woman began to take root in his heart, and for the first time, Chen Yuanshan felt afraid that he might give his heart to someone. Boss said he got breakfast ready today. Lin Wanting said as she walked into the guest house kitchen like a hostess, carefully preparing the meal. She'd even specially prepared some side dishes for the guests and changed the flower vase on the balcony. You don't have to do everything yourself anymore after all. I am here. Chen Yuanshan paused for a moment after hearing that, then asked, is this really okay? Of course. Shouldn't you, boss, have a companion by your side too? She gradually and subtly became a part of Chen Yuanshan's life, just like an old married couple, or even like family. Chen Yuanshan too was slowly growing accustomed to her warmth. The problem was that this habit had become far too sweet. One day, Gus paid another visit, a woman Chen Yuanshan recognized. It has been so long, I'll never forget those hands. In that instant, when Wan heard these words from behind her, her expression crumbled, yet she couldn't help but smile. It was late at night, and the divorced female guest knocked on Chen Yuanshan's door once again. You'll be just like you were that day. Went you? Chen Yuanshan didn't answer. He simply closed his eyes. And in his mind's eye, when Wanting's face appeared vividly, he recalled the grilled green fish he'd arranged for at the dinner table, the courtyard where she used to hang out the laundry. Is it okay if I stay here? Chen Yuanshan didn't leave the room. The guest's knocking on the door sounded several times. The next morning, when Wanting was wiping the balcony, Chen Yuanshan quietly stepped up and took the cloth from her hand. She blinked. Why don't you like it? Why don't you want to touch that woman so freely anymore? When Wanting said nothing at all, simply burying her face against Chen Yuanshan's chest. That is why I'm so scared. I don't know how deeply your heart has returned to me. That night, the two of them entwined again beneath the quilt, this time more passionately, longer lasting, though with an even greater longing than before. Now I am also one of your boss's people. Summer has arrived and the guest house is at its peak season. Chen Yuanshan has been busy all day long greeting guests and handling various tasks, completely swamped with work. And now, beside Chen Yuanshan is Lin Wanting. From confirming reservations and cleaning rooms to preparing meals, she has naturally taken on all the tasks Chen Yuanshan assigns her without hesitation. Boss, I made some cold salad today. Let us definitely have lunch together this noon. Her tone was filled with affection. There was no longer any hesitation in Chen Yuanshan's eyes. It was late at night, and all the guests had already fallen asleep. Chen Yuanshan knocked on Lin Wanting's door. He didn't hesitate. At all, he slowly pushed open the door of the woman who had opened her heart to him countless times before. Let me hold you instead. Lin Wanting took Chen Yuanshan's hand and led him into the quilt. Body temperatures and gazes merged completely into one. Chen Yuanshan's hand slowly traced the contours of her voluptuous, beautiful body. Now, this was no longer about technique. There was a touch born of genuine sincerity. Boss, you know, ever since I first met you, I just knew things would end up like this. But I never imagined that at my age I'd still be able to hug someone like this again. That night was brief yet profoundly meaningful. When Wanting fell asleep in Chen Yuanshan's arms, Chen Yuanshan gently brushed aside a strand of her hair and whispered softly, Wanting, I'll never think of you as just a guest again. Chen Yuanshan's guest house welcomed a new guest. Chen Yuanshan opened the door, and a woman, her 40 seconds, wearing with his sunglasses, stood at the threshold. I made the reservation by myself. I heard the massage at Guiyuan Homestay here is amazing. Chen Yuanshan looked at him. Then Lin Wanting came out from behind it, seeing the scene before her, smiled softly. Welcome. This is a place that'll warm both your body and soul. Days are like streams in the mountains, seemingly calm, yet subtly carving out new channels without our noticing. Where Wanting's presence has ceased to be just a fleeting glimpse among the guests at Guiyuan Homestay. Instead, she has become its most steadfast cornerstone. At the first rays of sunlight breaking through the morning mist, Chitty quietly slipped into the kitchen, carefully preparing a warm cup of soy milk and a few refreshing side dishes for Chen Yuanshan. She remembers that he drinks coffee without sugar, and when sweeping the floor he always starts from the left side. A slight frown appears between his brows. These tiny, almost imperceptible habits have woven themselves solidly into Chen Yuanshan's 58-year life, like vines creeping unnoticed into his world. And so, the world he'd once grown accustomed to living alone has begun to take on a whole new kind of warmth. Chen Yuanshan still welcomes guests as before, still uses those hands that have been praised by countless people to soothe their weary muscles and joints. Yet some things have quietly changed. When his palms touch the backs of unfamiliar guests, he is no longer merely a masterful master, rather, he is more like an observer, sensing through the delicate touch of his fingertips the joysome towers of others' feelings that once had no connection to him at all. The fragility and longing that used to effortlessly stir ripples within his heart now seem veiled behind a layer of frosted glassboard and distant. When Wanting continues to welcome new guests, using her gentle smile and thoughtful words to make every newcomer feel right at home, she is no longer the wounded woman or wounded. She carefully prepares tea and snacks at her guests' yacht, and when they leave, She watches their car disappear around the bend at the end of the winding mountain road. She turns around and returns to their home, a place where Chen Yuanshan is always waiting for her. Between them, they rarely talked about the future, and even less often did they mention the past. When periods of indulgence had all been a mist in the mountains and forests, gradually fading away with time. They seemed more like a pair of old friends who shared an unspoken understanding, or a couple deeply devoted to each other through their day-to-day interactions. Each had become an indispensable part of the other's life. On an evening after the rain, the air was filled with the fresh scent of earth mingled with the fragrance of green grass. Chen Yuanshan sat beneath the eaves, watching the rainwater trickle down from the tiles and gather into tiny puddles on the ground. When Wan came over carrying a cup of hot tea, Pen sat down beside him. She didn't say a word, she simply remained silent, quietly gazing at the same rainy scene. Distant mountains. Her voice so soft it seemed as though she were afraid to disturb the tranquility. Doing this, Chen Yuanshan turned his head and glanced at her profile. The soft light after the rain gently fell upon her face, and making her look even more gentle than usual. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out and lightly placed his hand over hers, which rested on her lap, exuding a strength that brought him a sense of peace and reassurance. "That's perfect," he said slowly, his voice low and confident. For the question, she simply rested her head gently against his shoulder. She understood exactly what he meant. They didn't need a precise definition, nor did they require worldly labels to prove anything. The bond between them had long since transcended mere love or companionship. It was a profound sense of peace, a harmony they found after weathering the storms of their individual lives. It was a tacit understanding that needed no words at all, yet spoke volumes straight to the heart. It was late at night, and the sound of rain was gradually subsiding. Chen Yuanshan returned to his room and found the lamp by the bedside still lit. Next to it sat a glass of lukewarm water and several slices of cut fruit. He knew this was left behind by Lin Wanting. He picked up the glass and took a sip. A warm sensation spread from his throat all the way down to his heart. Outside the window, the mountains and forests had once again fallen silent. Only the occasional chirping of insects broke the stillness, as if whispering of the night's profound depth. Chen Yuanshan lay on his bed, eyes closed. He was no longer just a solitary mountain guard, nor merely a healer who used his hands to soothe others' pain. On his own place to belong, his very own Wanting. Meanwhile, Lin Wanting, in her own room, was also gazing out the window at the night sky, a faint smile playing on her lips. She knew she was no longer that wandering soul who had to search everywhere for comfort. She had found a place where she could let down all her guard and simply be herself, unfettered and at ease. Always like the quiet nights in these mountains, unremarkable yet brimming with a deeply reassuring strength. In the simplest of ways, they embodied the true meaning of companionship, not through its shattering vows, but through day after day and sit fast together, is not through fiery, passionate flames, but through the gentle, enduring warmth of an ever-flowing stream. The next morning, sunlight once again spilled across the courtyard. Chen Yuanshan was still sweeping the ground, and Lin Wanting was still preparing breakfast. Jiyuan Homestay welcomed the new day and a new set of guests. Yet when they exchanged smiles, each of them saw in the other's eyes not just their own reflection, but also an unspoken, profound love. Perhaps this moment was the best possible ending to their story, not an end at all, but rather the beginning of another kind of journey, a bond that grew richer and deeper with each passing day. Even amidst the ordinary,